We are on connective tissue, the first of the 4 types of tissues we're going to talk about, and see if you can remind yourself what the 4 tissue types are. That's the first step. Remember those. Okay, so when we're talking about connective tissues, remember in the previous video we said connective tissues fill spaces, they bind things together, they act as cushion and storage of actually storage of fat, things like that. So connective tissues are really important, and there's going to be some that you've actually heard of. But first I want to describe kind of the unique structure of connective tissue. Just like all tissues, connective tissues have cells. And I'm going to be referring to this little cartoon down here. So they're showing you here that the cells are these white things with the black dots. So there's lots of cells in connective tissues. And in between the cells, there is ground substance and fibers. Now the ground substance is all the blue stuff in this picture. And that's going to be solid, semi-solid, or liquid. And again, I'll give you some examples that make this sound relevant. Most of the connective tissues, not all, but most of them also have fibers. And these are going to be long proteins, relatively long proteins, that kind of give the ground substance some strength or flexibility or some of the characteristics of that ground substance. So there's lots of fibers. And I think we already talked about collagen. Collagen was the most abundant protein in the body. And so there's some of the fibers in these connective tissues are collagen fibers. And we've got a lot of collagen in our skin. Remember, if our skin starts getting saggy as we get older, it's because our collagen fibers are kind of wearing out a little bit. There's also elastic fibers that make tissues kind of stretchy. And so collagen fibers are kind of strong, elastic fibers are stretchy, and really the characteristics of the skin are well represented by what you see in these different kinds of fibers. So we have the cells. In between the cells, we have this ground substance and may or may not have fibers. And I had the word matrix here. So I just want to go back here. If we have the ground substance, the solid, semi-solid, or liquid substance between the cells, and there's some fibers, together we'll call that the matrix, the stuff in between the cells. So if we have the matrix, the stuff in between the cells, and the cells, that's going to be the connective tissue. And I put a chocolate chip cookie here just not to entice you into wanting to eat cookies, but because it is kind of a good representation of connective tissues. The chocolate chips would be the cells, and then the cookie dough in between would be the matrix. So whatever's in there. So the cells don't necessarily touch each other in most connective tissues, but they have this matrix in between, and that matrix is going to give them a unique characteristic. For some reason, the first slide always seems to not want to. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk more about connective tissues in detail. And so your book kind of puts them into 3 groups, and I think it's kind of helpful. They call them fibrous, meaning they have a lot of fibers. Supportive, they build major, they're really important in structure. And then the fluid connective tissues. And so we're going to talk about the fibrous connective tissues, the loose and the dense. And we're going to talk about loose, and adipose is a special kind of loose connective tissue. We're going to talk about dense connective tissue, and in particular, we're going to talk about tendons and ligaments. We'll talk about cartilage, bone, and blood. I'm not going to talk much about lymph, but not that it's not important. I just run out of time. So this is kind of the structure we're going to go on. So let's start talking about that loose fibrous connective tissue. And it says it can have fibers going many directions. It's going to bind things together. It supports the epithelium and many internal organs. If I look, let's just look at that microscopic image of what these tissues are. So in this picture, these dots are the cells. Remember, they're connective tissue, so they've got stuff in between the cells, the matrix. And you can see, this is called loose fibrous connective tissue, so you can see there's lots of fibers. Okay, and so that's the matrix with the fibers and the ground substance in between. If I look over here, this is something probably most of you have seen. This is just chicken, like you would be cooking chicken and it says, oh, take the skin off the chicken. And a lot of you would notice that there's this like clear stuff or this kind of shiny stuff that's connecting the skin to the underlying muscle. And that's loose connective tissue. And if you magnify it a little bit more, and you can even see it when if you look carefully at a live, an actual piece of chicken. But here's a picture that kind of shows you, you can see these kind of real light, fine stringy things. And those are the fibers that are between the cells. And so this tissue right here, this loose connective tissue, is actually attaching the skin to the muscles. It's also surrounding the muscles, as you can see here. Here's some chicken meat that's been kind of pulled apart, and these are muscle fibers, and there's connective tissue in between them. So this loose connective tissue, and it's not surprising that the fibers are going all different directions because your skin can be pulled in all different directions from the surface of the muscles, and you want to have fibers, these strong fibers holding it together. The other kind of loose connective tissue was adipose, and adipose means fat. Now, out of all the connective tissues, this one's really got a different structure. It doesn't have matrix. It actually just has a lot of cells, but it's categorized in connective tissue because it functions as a connective tissue. Here's that chicken again that you bought at the grocery store. And you can see the fat on it. You can see the adipose. You can feel on your body, your adipose, your fat. And fat cells or adipose cells are quite unique looking. What you see is just these great big open spaces. And you might see little pieces like that. There's a nucleus, but most of the cell, like that's one cell right there. There's the nucleus, but it's just filled with fat. So when you look at it under the microscope, fat doesn't stain very well with stains. So you just see the outer edge of that cell. So they don't have matrix like other cells, but they're really important for filling spaces, storing energy. Think if you don't have any fat on your butt and you sit on a hard surface, it's not going to feel very good. It fills up spaces, it stores energy in the forms of fat, and it is considered a connective tissue. So these are the fibrous connective tissues. We did loose connective tissues. Now we're into dense connective tissue. And just think about that, how those fibers in loose connective tissue were going all different directions. They had a lot of matrix in between them. They had a lot of ground substance in between them. So they're space. So that's why it's called loose. Dense connective tissue has a lot of those strong collagen fibers, but they all run in the same direction. And if you look at this cartoon, that's what it's showing you, that all these fibers, so there's the cells, and here's the fibers, and they're all running in the same direction. And these are really strong tissues, but they're strong only pulled in one direction. So it's you would take the ends of the tissue and pull in two directions. They don't pull sideways. So a tendon is made of dense connective tissue. And right here, hopefully a lot of you are familiar with the Achilles tendon. And you can feel that if you put your foot on your heel and you feel that kind of cord-like structure going up into your muscle. It's attaching your gastrocnemius, your calf muscle, to your heel bone, to your calcaneus there. And so a tendon is made of this dense connective tissue connecting bone to muscle. Tendons connect bones to muscle. Ligaments connect bones to bone. So here's an image of a knee, and a lot of us have heard of our ACL. We hear a lot about dogs tearing their ACL. What the heck is that? Well, it's the anterior cruciate ligament. And so here's your femur, the bone on top of your leg, and your tibia, the bone that makes up your shin bone, and they're actually attached by this ligament. So, and you can see again the direction that the fibers are running. These ligament is made of dense connective tissue, lots of collagen, and it's going to connect bone to bone. So tendons and ligaments are dense connective tissues. They have a lot of collagen fibers running in all the same direction, and they're designed to be able to be pulled in two directions. Tendons connect muscle to bone, ligaments connect bone to bone. In the supportive connective tissues, we have cartilage. But if we go back to the structure of cartilage, the matrix, the stuff in between the cell, is kind of semi-solid. So, and a lot of you, probably almost everybody, has seen like a chicken bone at the end of the leg. There's a little piece of cartilage. It's kind of flexible. Our ears have cartilage in them. You can feel the flexibility. It's kind of rubbery feeling that they have. Our nose, the end of our nose, has cartilage in it. So that flexibility is due to that semi-solid matrix. Here's a microscopic image of cartilage, and here's the cells. And in between is the matrix, the fibers. There's not a lot of fibers in cartilage, actually. It's mostly just ground substance, this semi-solid ground substance. Cartilage provides cushion and structure. You've probably heard of people that had knee replacements or hip replacements, and they say, oh, I was just bone on bone. The cartilage had all worn down and it was really painful. So cartilage, we have cartilage at the ends of our bones to provide cushions in our joints. You might hear, this little diagram here shows you there's 3 different kinds of cartilage. The most common kind of cartilage is hyaline cartilage. That's the cartilage in our joints. And I just gave you that term because you'll probably see that term and know what it is. Cartilage is very flexible, like your ears and nose. One of the interesting things about cartilage is, unlike most connective tissues have a really good blood supply. In fact, adipose, if you've ever heard of somebody getting liposuction, like they go in for surgery to remove fat. And so what they're doing is they're sucking out adipose tissue. And actually, one of the biggest risks of liposuction is blood loss and fluid loss, because the adipose is so well vascularized. It's got a lot of blood vessels. So most connective tissues have a really good blood supply. Cartilage has a really poor blood supply. And for a tissue to heal, it needs nutrients from the blood, it needs to deliver oxygen and food, and allow the cells to grow. But because cartilage has a really poor blood supply, it tends to heal very slowly. So you could break your leg and it could heal faster because bones actually have really good blood supply. That could potentially heal faster than if you damage the cartilage in your knee. So it just kind of gives you some understanding of why a knee injury like that with cartilage could take a long time to heal. Our other supportive connective tissue is bone tissue, and bone tissue looks kind of odd. It has a solid matrix, and there's a lot of collagen fibers, those flexible, strong fibers, and a lot of calcium salts. So the calcium salts give it strength, but the collagen gives bone flexibility. And if we look at this is again a microscopic picture of bone. And even though this one thing right here looks like a cell, it's actually not. It's a unit of bone called an osteon. And we're not going to, I think if you took A&P, you'd learn more about osteons and structure and all that. But what I'd like to show you about this is here's a unit of bone. Each one of these little tick marks is a bone cell. Each one of those tick marks is a bone cell. This thing in the middle of this osteon is actually a place where blood vessels and nerves run through the bone. So I like to remind people that bones do have a blood supply, and they do have nerves in them. In fact, bone cancer can be extremely painful because there are a lot of nerves in bone. But the matrix being solid when the tumor grows, you can imagine a solid matrix putting pressure. There's not a lot of flexibility in there. So it's going to put pressure on nerves and be extremely painful. So there's the bone cells. In between the bone cells, the matrix has a lot of collagen and calcium salts. And without the collagen fibers in the bone matrix, the bone would be very brittle, almost like chalk. So the reason why we can, like slam our bone into something hard, like you tripped and you hit the piece of furniture and your bone didn't break, is that all that collagen in there gives the bone some flexibility. There's actually two kinds of bones that you can see macroscopically and without a microscope. So I think this is a femur bone, the one here in the hip, makes up the hip and the leg. And they cut it open. They did a longitudinal section here. And inside the bone, you can see here, it looks really solid. And we call that compact bone. And so compact bone makes up the shafts of the long bones. It's going to make up the long part of the long bones. You can also see this bone that is really got a lot of spaces in it. And it's got a little bit different structure. It's called spongy bone. And spongy bones typically found in the ends of bones, and it just helps make our bones lighter. So there's this real balance in evolution of an organism that you want the bones to be strong, but you also want them to be light enough that the organism can move fast. You don't want to be carrying a lot of extra weight. So the presence of spongy bone in the ends of bones gives us that kind of compromise of strength versus weight. Okay, think of those three categories we had of connective tissue. We had the fibrous, we had the supportive, and the cartilage in the bone, and now we're into the fluid, and it's blood. And so when you look at the definition of connective tissue, it fills space, it binds things together, it provides cushions, things like that, stores fat. Blood kind of fits in there because it says it fills space. But the other big thing that makes it a connective tissue is it's got cells and stuff in between the cells. So cells and matrix, which puts it into connective tissues. So if I'm looking at the cartoon of blood, so the picture of blood right here is what you would see under your microscope if you were working in a live lab. Of blood, and this is a cartoon of that. So blood has a liquid matrix, and that's the stuff in between the cells, and we call that plasma. Plasma is the stuff in between the cells, and we're going to talk more about blood this semester, so we'll get more information about that. And there's also three different kinds of cells in the blood. The red blood cells are the most common, and they carry oxygen. The white blood cells, which really do look white in real life, but when we stain them for a slide, they kind of look purple. And those are involved in fighting infections. And then you can see these tiny little things called platelets. And here you see them. They're really only pieces of cells. And they're involved in blood clotting. So we're going to talk a lot more about that, but that's our liquid, our connective tissue with a liquid matrix. And I just wanted to show you this one picture because it just reviews some of the things we just talked about. Some of the connective tissues found in the knee. So we've got a lot of loose connective tissue, loose fibrous connective tissue. Remember, that's the stuff. It's got fibers going all different directions. It's holding the skin to the underlying tissue. It's surrounding the muscles to kind of hold the muscles together. It's binding things together. We have dense connective tissue that's making up the tendons and the ligaments. So there's a tendon. I know it's a tendon because it's connecting muscle to a bone. And it makes up the ligaments. Here's a ligament. Well, that's part of a ligament, connecting bone to bone. Adipose, and I think I neglected to tell you that there was a vocabulary word that said adipocyte. That just means adipose cell. So adipose made of a lot of adipocytes, but remember adipose is just fat tissue. These are cells that store fat. And look at where all that fat tissue is. We don't think about our knees being fat, but there's a lot of fat that's filling in the spaces and providing cushions. One of our supportive connective tissues is cartilage. And remember, the cartilage has that semi-solid matrix, and there's a lot of hyaline cartilage on the ends of bones. And finally, we have compact bone. We have bone tissue where we have the little bone cells, these little ticks. They call them osteocytes here. So the bone cells and the solid matrix making that up. Oh, and here's some spongy bone in there. Okay, we could have even fit blood in there. There's blood vessels involved, and blood would be in there. So that's all involved in that, the whole overall structure of that knee joint. So you get a good review of lots of tissues when you look at that. Connective tissues, here's some questions. Let's see if you can do it. Good luck. I'm going to go to the next video.